The biggest impact that Hurricane Milton has caused on our families has been economic. On top of their houses taking on water, their roofs losing shingles and taking on water, and mold and all these other things that come in right after a hurricane. They lost electricity, they lost groceries, they lost quite a bit. So a lot of these families are dependent on churches and community-based organizations in order to lift themselves up and make ends meet and make their lives right.
Today, we have the honor and privilege of introducing and speaking with Father Jose Rodrigues of Christ the King Episcopal Church in Orlando. Welcome, Father.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Today, I have my co-host, retired police chief and military historian, David Magnusson. How are you, David?
Doing great, Robert. How about yourself?
Doing great.
Good.
Well, let's get right into it.
Please.
Father, I know you've been, oh my God, I don't know how you find time to sleep. So I know that you're probably on fumes, but tell us what the impact has been and what you're doing, and also where people can direct resources to help your community.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share with you about the community I live in, the Azelea Park community, the greater community of Orlando, and the Latino community here in Central Florida. The biggest impact that Hurricane Milton has caused on our families has been economic impact. A lot of our families are workers. They work 9 to 5 jobs, sometimes overnight shifts. They work regular jobs that are dependent on the tourism economy. They're also dependent on their workplaces being open. Hurricane Milton shut them down for 2 to 3 days. Hurricane Milton has caused cancellation of events. Hurricane Milton is trickling down through their lives in a way that's impacting them economically. On top of their houses taking on water, their roofs losing shingles and taking on water, and mold and all these other things that come in right after a hurricane. They lost electricity, they lost groceries, they lost quite a bit. Many of our hardworking families are immigrants and refugees who are here they're here legally. They're able to work and they're working legally. However, even though they're paying taxes, now that this hurricane has moved through, the resources coming in are federal, and they do not qualify for aid from FEMA, for example. So a lot of these families are dependent on churches and community-based organizations in order to lift themselves up and make ends meet and make their lives right.
So besides the job, and I take it there's been damage to houses and lives. Can you describe some of those impacted?
A lot of our neighbors are still reeling from Hurricane Ian and that hurricane season 2 years ago. I don't know if you all remember the news. Parts of Orlando were flooded. Downtown Orlando became a lake, and parts of Orlando near the University of Central Florida, students had to be evacuated in canoes. Those hurricanes revealed that a lot of rain inland can lead to a lot of devastation. Hurricane Milton was no different. We didn't have Lake Eola breaching its borders. But we did have neighborhoods go underwater. We did have wind take roofs apart. We did have trees falling on cars, trees falling on homes. And we did have water damage, water that is still on our streets having to be pumped out. And the phenomena of floods after the hurricane means the water rises after a hurricane. So for the good week or so after the hurricane, we're not seeing water levels go down. We're seeing them go up. So a lot of our neighbors are waterlogged, wind damaged, economic losses, and other losses from not having electricity. Their pantries are bare, and the food they did have in their refrigerators has gone bad.
It's horrific. What the father said specifically with the water rising, just when you think it's over, it's not. Same with the rivers. There's always a week or two later. It's going to crest at a certain level. I know that from my time in North Carolina. It's, the trauma continues. It continues.
It was repeated or revealed that the water will be cresting over the next 30 days. So you still have some time here. It's not just going to be a week. It's not just going to be 2 weeks. It's probably be a whole month.
Again, the lakes didn't breach the way they did for Ian, but you don't have to be next to Lake Eola and get flooded in. To be on a street that has poor drainage or drainage that's been disrupted by new construction elsewhere. We have streets that are flooded, backyards that are flooded. My own backyard is a sponge. And here at the church, the water is so saturated that we have ants all over our walls. The ants have been flooded out of their ant hills. So, the presence of water in and around us is very evident by flooded streets and even insects that are crawling into homes. We got an insect problem at the church that we've not had before. And so we've been proactively and actively we've been doing pest control to protect the food stocks we have in our food pantry. Again, not a problem we've had before, but a problem caused by Milton. So can you imagine all the insects going to people's homes after this hurricane? It's pretty wretched. And again, not as bad as our friends on the Gulf Coast. I do not want to compare and say that we're suffering to that level of suffering, but what is not helpful has been the elected officials and our neighbors and leaders saying that Orlando's been spared, everything is great, everything is wonderful, and what they're doing is they're magnifying suffering in our community by silencing it.
Father, I know that you recently were doing hot meal drives or providing hot meals to the community through organizations that came to help. Talk to us a little bit about that. What was the reception?
And listen, this is a Latino church. So when we heard that there was food coming in, we gathered up our community. When our community gathered, they brought music, they brought salsa, they brought music and dance and song. And the people were happy. They were elated to have been seen. They were elated to be heard. And they celebrated throughout the feeding sessions. And they celebrated throughout our food pantry being open. Our community is being festive. Se está levantando. It's rising up, In Puerto Rico, we say para arriba y pa'lante, up and forward. So our community, in spite of its need, in spite of the situation it finds itself in, it is meeting this disaster with a smile, with a dance, and with rhythm.
At the end, there's nothing more important than to lift that spirit up. You made a very sound point, and I think that can resonate with a lot of people.
So let's get right to the point of, call to action. We were spared in South Florida, 100%. And we want to get the word out to our brothers and sisters in our community that our family members to the north were impacted. And if they want to help, and we encourage everyone to help, how can they help, Father?
They can help by donating to a trusted partner in their community. If you go to church, ask your pastor if they're doing anything. If you're part of a neighborhood association or a community organization, ask your leadership if they're doing anything. If you want to help us, we're always open to receiving help, financial or food. Go to your local Latino supermarket, bring us some Latino food that you eat, or bring us some food that you find in the Latino aisle. Bring it to our church. We're here in Orlando. Or you can donate online to our healinglocalhunger.com, http healinglocalhunger.com, and you can contribute directly to our efforts to not only feed our neighbors in Central Florida, but we are going to be going into the impacted areas in the Gulf Coast. We're working with one of our sister churches in near Waimama, and we will be bringing some hot food, groceries, diapers, and we're going to go there to meet some needs.
If you find it in your heart, if you care about humanity, I encourage you to please help our brothers, family members, sisters to the north of us who are not as lucky as we were in South Florida. Father, I want to get to something that's near and dear to our heart, and the reason why we started this, part of why we started this, was to tell individual stories, this podcast, right? To tell individual stories. You are an American hero. I consider you an American hero, not because of only the work that you do as a father, as the pastoral community, but you served our country as a member of the military, civilian side. Can you talk a little bit about your background with the Marines, and let our audience know a little bit about Padre Jose Rodrigues?
I wasn't expecting that question. My grandfather and my father and my brother and my uncle served the military. I was third generation in. I didn't put on the uniform, but very early on when I graduated college, I wanted to be with the Department of Defense. I took on a job with the Army, and then I went over to the Marine Corps, Marine Corps Systems Command, training systems, their development and their procurement and their sustainment. And that was one of the best careers I've ever had. Nearly 17 years, Department of Defense, focused on those training systems that prepared our armed men and our armed women, the women of our armed forces, the men of our armed forces, to train safely, to go out, the warfighter to go out and come back to their families. I really enjoyed that part of my life, working with young people, meeting them on their bases, and going. I deployed to Norfolk for a while as a civilian, and then I visited many of our bases throughout the country. It was a very inspirational time in my life, and it's part of who I am, not only as a priest, my vocation of helping and serving my country, but it's the model that my father instilled in our home. My father was National Guard all of my life up through high school, and we would see him deployed. He deployed to Andrew. He deployed to flooding areas. He also deployed to other parts of the world where there was humanitarian crisis, and he would volunteer to go and get activated. This whole idea of helping our neighbors, being our brother's keeper, finding a duty of care in our own neighborhoods among those we know, and having a duty of care nationally and internationally. I credit that to my father, the faith they raised me up in, and it's something that now that I'm a priest, now that I've gone to work for not-for-profits and community-based organizations, it's something that I bring with me. Disaster relief and recovery is something that very much is close to my heart, and finding ways of serving outside of the church, outside of a uniform, but being inspired by those who serve, to serving as a civilian and knowing that you don't need a uniform in order to be a helping hand to somebody in need.
True American.
And though I don't know if you call it a uniform per se, what you're wearing now is probably the most important. And so thank you.
I appreciate it with all my heart, and I really appreciate the opportunity you gave me to talk about my father. He was my hero. I love him very much, and he's gone on from here, but he's left behind a legacy that I hope that my children have also seen, and they also emulate.
I believe you have your doctoral in disaster relief, right? Part of it, you do specialty in that area.
My
You're
dissertation,
also mental health, right?
yeah, my dissertation was on the pastoral care, the trauma-informed care of people displaced by hurricanes, with a focus on those that were displaced to Orlando after Hurricane Maria. So my entire dissertation was around disaster relief, recovery, mental health, trauma-informed care, and hurricanes.
Well, let's talk about mental health and trauma and the impact of that we're about to see played out over the next coming weeks, months, and years as a result of these hurricanes back to back.
It's gotta weigh on you. It has to. I mean, that first storm that came through, Helene, I mean, I don't think anybody was thinking about another one coming through a week and a half later in almost the same spot. And it's not over yet. And yeah, there'll be a lapse for a couple of months once hurricane season ends at the end of November, but then it starts again all over. So that psyche of what people are going through, it's not like you can put it aside, more like what happened in Andrew. I mean, you still had hurricane season 1993. And anytime a storm started brewing, people say, oh, no, not again. It takes its toll. It has to.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you seeing any signs of psychological trauma being manifested or being displayed by members of the community?
We were seeing it before the hurricane, especially among our Hurricane Maria survivors that now live permanently in Central Florida. We're also seeing it within our Puerto Rican community, who, while they didn't go through Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, they went through Hurricane Maria in Orlando by watching the news being cut off from their families for weeks, and then also seeing the plight and trying to help our fellow Puerto Ricans that were displaced here. And we especially saw it in the Latinos that are here, who've been here less than a year. Central Florida is a receiving community for many Latin American countries. We have a lot of Colombians and Venezuelans who've never been through a hurricane, who this was their first hurricane. During this hurricane, we housed 3 households in my home, all Colombian families who'd never gone through a hurricane. And the fear of the unknown that they were going through was quite impactful for me and my family. It touched my children, and it's always what my wife and I have done. But the reality is, this is one hurricane right on top of another. And it's right on top of another because we are still recovering from Hurricane Ian. The church is still working with FEMA directly for the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, the flooding, the damage. The church was damaged during Hurricane Ian. I haven't been able to raise money to fix the church after Ian. Now I have damage from Milton. I'm not complaining because if it happened to the church, it's happened to the homes in our neighborhood. It's happened to the homes in our community. And we haven't talked about the displacement. I-4 connects Tampa with Orlando. People in Tampa, St. Petersburg, once they've realized that they're going to have to rebuild, some of them are going to choose to go down the I-4 corridor and rebuild in Orlando. The same way that Puerto Ricans on the island took advantage of the direct flight from San Juan to Orlando, and they decided, you know what, if I'm going to rebuild, I'm going to rebuild more inland. We already have a housing crisis in Central Florida, a massive one that was actually made worse by the Puerto Rican migration after Hurricane Maria and the Venezuelan migration, because prices went up, house supplies were dwindled, and now I feel from experience, I know from experience that Orlando, as a receiving community, is going to be receiving hurt, broken, displaced people. It's only a matter of weeks before we start seeing people from Tampa caravan into Orlando to restart their lives.
There's a huge need for, I can't say it enough, workforce development in a state where a good percentage of the people employed, the workforce, is underemployed and underpaid. For
And
proof
when
of
you
that, all you have to do is go to the Alice report, United Way Alice report, and you'll see documented facts. I'm sorry, Father, you were saying?
And then when you add displacement on that, there's going to be people looking for new jobs and different jobs. The job they did on the Gulf Coast might not be the job they're going to do or want to do
Yeah.
on in Central Florida, or it may not be the job that's available. So workforce development and redevelopment and helping people earn a living wage and find good jobs is all part of disaster recovery.
That's more than just flooding or a storm that hits. There's a lot more to it, and seemingly, it seems that now is when it's going to get broader and broader, and the issues are going to come to light more and more. This is the time, and moving forward, where people are going to need that assistance in some shape or form.
Absolutely. So, Father, if anyone wants to contribute to your church, Christ the King, Episcopal Church, how can they go about it?
It's http :// and then it's simply healinglocalhunger.com. Healinglocalhunger.com without the www dot. Healinglocalhunger.com will take you straight to a giving page. The food, the money we collect is used to buy food that families eat. Our food pantry is actually run by the clients themselves. They're the leadership of the food pantry, and you're enabling our community to lift itself up. We're also going to be using some of those funds to help churches and other communities out in the Gulf Coast with a focus on Waimama.
Not a handout, but a hand up.
Our families support each other. They run the food pantry. And then after they graduate from needing food from the food pantry, many of them have stayed behind and they add programming and other support for other families. It's a beautiful system. And it's not a donation to just feed people. It's a donation to empower a community.
Outstanding. On that note, can you give us the last couple words of inspiration here?
I can't compare what we're going through in Orlando with the pain that is happening up in places like North Carolina, in the Tampa Bay region, and in parts of the Panhandle. All I can say is that we have to remember we're one community and not let the different regions divide us. We have to remember that we're one community, and while people in the Gulf Coast are down, the people in Orlando can help lift them up. This is not a competition for resources. This is moving up. This is a uniting of community. This is a remembering that we're all in this together and we're all going to support each other through this. So I hope that we support each other wherever we've been impacted, and we do this for the sake of all of us. We're in this together, and like I said in Spanish, para arriba y pa'lante, up and forward.
Well, this has been another episode of Bets and Badges. If you'd like to find out more about us, like to get more involved with us, please visit us on all podcast major platforms at Bets and Badges. To the Millers, Michael Grant Miller, thank you. The community news team, thank you. And our producer behind the scene, Daniel Quevedo. We can't thank you enough. And you, the audience. Look forward to speaking with you next time.